Do you have questions?
Hey. I wanted to explore a little bit deeper the yoga meditation that we were doing before. I think you said early on into the guided part that there is no space between mentation. And when you say mentation, you're not just talking about what's going on inside, right? Like the thoughts and the...
Mentation is anything which is perceived.
Yeah, that's what I can't get my head around, because there is a sense of space, say between you and me. Is it just, and I'm wondering, does that sense of space, is it just that?
But what you call, but that's a physical space, is that which seems to separate objects in space. But physical objects in space, they are not experienced. We experience only our perception of the object, but not the objects. You see, because for instance, when you and I, we look at this computer, we see two different images. You have your perception of the computer, I have mine. You see it from the side, I see it from the front.
Right.
So your perception and my perception are different. So, and the perception is that which we actually perceive.
So, are you basically saying that this is all happening in...
No, I'm saying what I'm saying. I'm saying that that we don't perceive the same thing, you and I. Right?
Yeah.
So that what you perceive is your perception of something we call the computer. I perceive is my perception of something we call a computer. Mm-hmm. So, since we perceive two different things, right? That's what we actually perceive. We actually perceive our perceptions. That's it, right?
Right.
So, and whereas the computer is deemed to be out there in space, our perceptions of the computer are in a different space, not in physical space. They are in mind space being where the thought appears, the bodily sensations appears. But following my reasoning, we realize that also the sense perceptions through which we perceive the physical world in fact appear also in mind space. So that the physical world is not directly perceived, it's perceived via perceptions of it. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So yes, so then physical space is that which separates two objects, physical objects. Physical objects, we don't perceive them directly, but we perceive them through perceptions.
Right.
Right?
Which occurs in the mind.
Which occurs in the mind, yes. And so physical space, we never perceive it, really. It's an inference. We don't perceive it any more than we perceive the objects. Because we perceive the perceptions of the objects. Right? But so the objects in physical space, we call them physical objects. The objects in mind space, we call them mentations, right? So by analogy with physical space, which is deemed to be that which separates objects in physical objects, mind space would be that which separates mind objects. But the topology of mind space is, when we look closely at it, is different from the topology of physical space. Because objects are not really separate in mind space. If we don't perceive simultaneously two mentations, without these two mentations becoming one single mentation. You're following me?
Just by virtue of they occupy the same.
It's an experience that I cannot prove. I refer to your own experience.
Right.
We are under the impression that mentations are separate in time, that I perceive, for instance, thought number one, and after that, thought number two, right? But that this thought number one and thought number two, they don't coexist.
Right. They're separated by time.
Yeah, time is that which allegedly separates thought number one from thought number two.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, because of this strange property of mind, that mind cannot perceive two objects simultaneously. Human mind, right? In its mode of functioning, the past event appears currently as a recollection, and the separation, that which really separates mind objects is consciousness. What appears between mind objects is consciousness. And what is, not what appears. What is. So in fact, there is no mind, you see. There are only mentations. And mentations appear in consciousness, exist in consciousness, disappear in consciousness. So their reality, their substance, is the consciousness in which they appear. So ultimately, the real mind space is consciousness. The distinction between mind space and consciousness is very subtle. It's simply the belief we superimpose that there is a separate mind.
And I just wanted to clarify, I guess going back to space, I mean, is that because again,
Which one? The physical?
Yeah,
or?
the physical one. Is it, because you said, alleged, like the mentations in the mind are allegedly separated by time. Am I allegedly separated by space, like me and the computer? Is it just an inference, just a sort of?
Well, the external world is an inference. So the separation between objects in the world, if you will, is an inference. So the separation between objects that are part of this world is also an inference.
Only in as much as the whole thing is an inference.
Yeah. The real nature, anyway, of also physical space is consciousness. That's the beauty of it. Whether there is a world out there, in other words, whether this inference is true, because, well, it is not a legitimate inference, the external world. It's a hypothesis, really. It's not a legitimate inference. Because since we have seen that we cannot perceive that we never perceive the external world directly, that we perceive it also via mentations, we don't have a prior real experience of the external world. We never have seen the external world, you see. We have only seen our perceptions of it.
Right.
Just that in the dream, you see a forest, right? But you have never seen the forest. You have seen only your perceptions in the mind of the forest. And as you wake up, you realize the forest was simply not there. But so because we don't have a prior direct experience of the world, we cannot say that we can infer the world from our perceptions. Because to infer the presence of an object, we need to have had from another object. For instance, to infer the presence of fire from the presence of smoke, we need to have a prior body of evidence of experiencing simultaneously the fire and the smoke. You see? So we have seen many times that fire, that smoke is a companion of fire. And then many times also we have had the experience of seeing smoke, not seeing the fire, then getting close and always seeing the fire that was generating the smoke. So the next time we see smoke, because of our prior experience to both fire and smoke, we infer the presence of fire. But here, if we were using the same inference reasoning, that if there is a perception of the external world, there we infer an external world, we should have a prior body of simultaneously experiencing our perceptions and experiencing the external world.
Right.
But we don't have such a body of evidence since we have never experienced the external world.
Right.
So that it is not true to say that we can infer the external world from our perceptions.
Right.
So it's not an inference, it's a theory. You see, that's different. A theory is a model that explains. And why do we have this theory of an external world? It's in order to explain the intersubjective agreement, which is the fact that you and I, we agree that this is a computer. Although our perceptions are different, we agree. So we say, okay. And also, the fact that if I leave the room, right, you see the computer, you leave the room, I come back, I see the computer. So whatever it is that we see, that we call the computer, is independent from your mind and from my mind. Therefore, it has an existence which is independent from both of our minds. So there is something out there, which we call the world, which is independent from minds.
Yeah.
Now, does it exist as such when not perceived? That's a different. Does the perception create it somehow? Or does it exist already with its specificities? And it's a computer, it's not a tennis racket, right? So it has specificities. Does it exist with its qualities and specificity when not perceived? Or does that, and that would be the existence of a world,
Exactly. Yeah.
or does it come out of limbo, out of a soup in which a potentiality, and do its specificity manifest only when we perceive it?
By one mind or another.
That's a question that we cannot really decide. Because in order to decide it, we would need to have a God's view, which is consciousness view. But for all practical purposes, if we understand consciousness as the reality that perceives, and if we understand that there is only one reality, it doesn't make, for all practical purpose, it doesn't make any difference whether the world gets created as we perceive it, with its specificities, or whether its specificities exist prior to being perceived.
Which would imply a material world.
A kind of a material world. It would. The only question is, does it exist as potentiality, or does it exist as actuality? And what does actuality mean in the absence of perception? That's also a very interesting question, philosophically.
Yeah. Going back to the smoke and fire thing.
Inference. Yeah.
Inference, yeah. Yeah, I as it's right now, I'm perceiving a laptop. And I can't necessarily infer an external reality because I haven't experienced that external reality. But the fact that I'm perceiving this laptop, all I can say for certain is that, well, there's an awareness.
Yes.
So that's the fire? Is that, I mean, it...
No, in that case, the fire was a world existing while not perceived.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, that's a different issue.
Yeah,
But what is important is this, is that, again, some people would say, again, that's important to go back to the inference, because there is a mistaken view according to which consciousness is inferred from the perception of objects. In other words, the question is this one, philosophically. Is consciousness an inference or is it an experience? You see? So, some would say that consciousness is not an experience, that we have no direct experience of consciousness, but that we infer consciousness from the fact that objects are perceived. I perceive, therefore I am.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The therefore here, that is a signature of an inference, is fallacious. For the very same reason that I mentioned earlier on. You know, in order to infer the fire from the smoke, you need to have a series of prior experience of the fire and the smoke simultaneously, right? Mm-hmm. But here the argument is that we have no experience of consciousness. For consciousness is the fire we infer, right?
Right.
So therefore, if we have no prior experience of consciousness, the inference is bullshit. You see? So the argument according to which the certainty we have that there is consciousness is an inference from the presence of perceptions doesn't fly. Because the inference doesn't apply in this case. It's very important because that's a mistake, that's a very common mistake that people believe. I don't experience consciousness directly. I only experience perceptions. Mm-hmm. And from the perceptions, I infer consciousness. That doesn't work because according to the argument itself, we have no experience of consciousness now or prior. That cannot work. Now, therefore, the conclusion is very important, is that this certainty we have that there is consciousness must come from direct experience. There is no other, either because it cannot come from inference, it cannot come from hearsay. Right? Because we know that not because our parents have told us that we are conscious. Right? Therefore, the only remaining possibility is that it comes from direct experience. And therefore, that there is such a thing as a direct experience of consciousness, and it is this insight, this glimpse, through which we know that there is consciousness. And that often, we mistakenly believe to be an inference from the presence of sensations, of perceptions. Right. Now, once we have recognized that the experience of consciousness is a direct experience, then the inference is valid because we have had many, many prior experiences of both consciousness and objects. So then from this vantage point, the moment we acknowledge that consciousness is directly experienced, it becomes legitimate to say that it can also be inferred from the presence of perceptions.
I see.
Okay, we have to give some time for the brain to cool off. Hey,
Hi.
Kathleen.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi. So I have a handful of questions that I've been holding on to for some time. We'll see how far we get. But the first one actually came up during the yoga today, so I thought I'd start there. And at some point you said, like, see that this, or realize this sense of me is entirely comprised of bodily sensations. And that hit me, and it felt like freedom, like, oh, what a relief. And then pretty quickly came like this fear that I might lose this sense of me. And I notice that happens often in other areas of my life where I can be feeling a lot of love or joy or whatever, and then freedom, and then the fear comes in, or maybe some sadness, and then you started saying, welcome the resistance. And I figured that's my resistance right there. And so I guess the question is that all I can do with that fear that tries to somehow feels like it's stopping, or it's like a barrier, a roadblock or something? So just keep on welcoming it? Or what else should I be doing? Can I do?
Well, so far, what you have discovered in your investigation is that when you allow for the sense of me to present itself, when you look at it, in other words, when you don't look away, it appears as fear, it turns into fear. Right?
Yes.
So, whatever it was that you were doing that enabled the sense of me to present itself and to reveal itself as fear, keep doing it, whatever it was you were doing.
So just keep going in.
In other words, not stop. Don't let the fear, because the fear says, stop right here. What you were doing was welcoming, in a sense. Yes, it was welcoming. And the fear is telling you, stop welcoming, I'm going to die. But you want the fear to die, really.
So just keep going in and down the road. Yeah. Just kind of, yeah.
Boldly.
Yeah.
Star Trek, you know.
Great, thank you. So another thing I've been contemplating. Well, first let's define a few things so that we're talking about the same thing. So everything is consciousness. Us, humans, the computer, the grass, everything, right? And that is the same as awareness. feels like there's something, say, take my body is alive, and I'm aware and I'm conscious. But someday the body's going to die, and it will not be, it appears, it will not be perceiving your words anymore. Yet this corpse is still made of consciousness. So, like, is there a difference between a conscious living being and consciousness? Like, what is the difference there? Do you see what I'm driving at? Like, what is this, like, aliveness factor that is consciousness versus, like, the table, which is also consciousness?
Yeah. What's the difference between a TV set which is working and a TV set which has been switched off? There is a difference, right? Yeah. Or a TV set that not only has been switched off, but has been completely recycled, and all the various rare metals have been separated from the glass and from the copper, etc., in the recycling facility. In this metaphor, consciousness is the owner, temporary owner of the TV set, enjoying the show. The body is a TV set.
I understand that. However, like, would you say that when my body is dead, it would still be perceiving?
No more than the TV set is producing images when it has been recycled.
But it's still consciousness.
The owner of the TV set is not affected by the destruction of the TV set. But there is an important point here that I would like to add, taking advantage of that which we have said earlier on. What I hope we have shown earlier on is that the experience of consciousness, to experience consciousness, it is not necessary to experience perceptions. Are you following me? We can directly experience consciousness. We don't need perceptions. When we show that it was a fallacy to believe that we derive through inference the existence of consciousness from the existence of perception. So now we understand that consciousness is independent from the perceptions. Which leaves open the possibility that yes, the body is a machine through which we perceive. And that in the absence of a body, we cannot perceive through this machine any longer. Just as we cannot watch TV any longer using this big, bulky computer. But that doesn't prevent us from owning a lot of flat-screen plasma TVs. What is important is to understand, that the moment we are open to the possibility that consciousness perceives itself in the absence of perceptions, that it is independent from the perceptions, then it opens a possibility for consciousness to be completely independent from the instruments through which we perceive the body.
Yeah, I think I've been limiting your definition, that the reality that perceives, to like this more of a mental or bodily perception. Now I'm starting to see. Okay. Thank you. I think I'll sit with that and save the rest of my questions.
Yeah, food for thought.
Thank you.
Francis, a very, I think, similar question in terms of how the mind can perhaps get in the way of understanding. In the dark night of the soul, there's a phrase that goes, when you come to the all, the truth, understanding, you must possess it without wanting anything. And possess mean, being it. And to me, that's pointing at the same thing you were just discussing. You mentioned perceiving consciousness without mind. Mind is, I want to capture this or save it for tomorrow or something of that nature. If you could comment.
Yeah. The difference, however, between what is explained here and John of the Cross approach, which is nada, 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 the five time nothing, right? There is in this approach a little bit of an effort, you see, which is a kind of a rejection of all that is perceived to go to the consciousness. So it belongs a little bit to the yogic approach. Here it's a little bit different because we work effortlessly through understanding. Understanding is access to universal intelligence using the mind. And using the mind in order to, as a tool to remove pre-existing beliefs by showing their, either their fallacy or their, you see, their fallacy actually. So that when all the beliefs are removed through intelligence, that which remains is nada, 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 nada. Because the true nothingness, if you will, cannot be created through effort. Because if you have an effort, this effort is already something. you don't reach the real nada. So that's why in the mystic path, the final jump is grace, right? Is because through the effort, there is an effort. I reject the world, I reject the mind, I reject everything, but I'm stuck with a nothingness, which is still something. And here, so it's more like using the pair of pliers to extract the tooth. Here it's done gently through anesthesia.
Very subtle. I mean, even the word surrender is in all actuality an effort, to surrender.
There are two surrenders. If we surrender to an object, that's an effort. But surrendering to intelligence is effortless. We can see that when we understand something, there is a surrender of the false concepts we were attached prior to the understanding, right? But this surrender is effortless. On the contrary, it's joyful, right? It's, now I get it. You see, now, that has bugged me forever, And now, I'm free from this stupid belief. You see, that's...
Quick question, Francis. This glimpse, generally when you first meet someone who enters this path, you ask them, "Are you conscious?" Or in some instances, you do. That is a pointer to that direct experience of consciousness itself.
Yes.
Okay. Also, I've heard you say that there's a difference between seeing the computer and being aware of seeing the computer. Now, that being aware of seeing the computer, is that awareness of consciousness while perceiving?
Yes. While there might be an interruption of the perception of the computer and connection with pure consciousness, and we say, "Oh yes," a moment of understanding.
And is it possible, because it seems to be the case a lot of time with me, that you could have that awareness of being aware for more than a glimpse, for, just almost as a normal experience, the awareness of being aware of. So in other words, that awareness seems to be there, of being aware of objects. Is that possible? It seems that's...
Yeah, this awareness of being aware we first experience it in the absence of objects, through a direct glimpse, a timeless glimpse, it's a moment of understanding.
So that was like when you ask, are you conscious?
Yeah, and in order to give the answer, they have to go to the place from where they derive the answer, which is the experience of consciousness. They have to go there. But remember that the question that is being asked is there consciousness, basically? And the answer is yes, there is consciousness. And then, because there are several questions that can be asked, And each of these questions will reveal a different quality of consciousness. Another question is consciousness real, or are you making it up? In other words, is this certainty that there is consciousness 100% or less than 100%? Is it just a probability, or is there an absolute certainty? You see, so then in order to answer this question, you have to go back to the experience, but then you discover that this experience gives you an absolute certainty, unlike any other experience you could of objects. Is there a computer here? Perhaps yes, perhaps no, because I may be dreaming. You see? Is there consciousness of the computer? Oh yes. No doubt is possible. So, in this way, we reach another quality of consciousness. But even when we reach this quality, we may still believe that consciousness is limited, human, you see, because so then there are several ways to go beyond that. One way is, for instance, to understand that there is only one reality. I cannot prove that to you, you see. So then you have to ask yourself, what is real? How do I make the determination of what reality is? And would it be possible to have two realities? And then, if I reach the certainty that there is only one reality, then that's it. Because if there is one reality, and if I experience that consciousness is real, then this glimpse is a liberating glimpse. But there is another way to do it, which is to ask the question, now that I know there is consciousness, and I know consciousness is real, how do I know that consciousness is limited if I believe for consciousness to be limited? You know? And then I investigate, I discover that I don't know that consciousness is limited. I have no proof, no evidence. So then I can conduct experiments to try to find out whether consciousness is limited or not. If you will, as a scientist would say, to ask the universe whether consciousness is limited or not. And I will receive answers, outcomes of those experiments that will erode the belief and destroy the belief that consciousness is separate and limited. So there are several ways to go about that. But going back to the glimpses, no matter how we get there, the liberation is when we move beyond the limitations of the body for consciousness. Any glimpse that takes us, that opens consciousness beyond the scope of the body, will have a liberating effect. Any glimpse which doesn't do that may already, take us further on the path. But we still will have this impending doom of limitation, of being a limited entity. At some point we have to break the shell, and to...
Right. Which is the reason I'm asking this question, because I feel like this entire life has been blessed. And I've been shown time and time again, you're talking about serendipity. It happens all the time and for many years. And yet, I feel like it's far from complete. My that realization is not here. I described my experience of being aware of perception, and yet I don't experience what I'm hearing to be this happiness and peace.
Because you project...
Pardon me?
You project, you construe it as a positive experience. And in doing so, you look in the wrong direction. You have to make a 180-degree rotation. In a sense, we are free before we know we are free. And the belief we are not free prevents us from enjoying our freedom. And the belief we are not free comes from a wrong conception, a wrong concept of the experience of freedom. Freedom is not the experience of an object. Freedom is not the experience of a positive experience. Freedom is the absence of a burden. And in this absence of a burden, the freedom shines. If we identify to someone who is not free, we make a mistake. we still identify with what? A body, a mind?
It's true. Because somehow I know this awareness, but I still haven't drowned in that awareness. I still identify, as you were saying. The identification seems to continue, I don't know how, but seems to continue along with the awareness.
But you cannot have both simultaneously. At any given moment, either we believe to be a separate entity or we are in not knowing in this regard.
So obviously I'm confused. So what would you advise? More investigation is needed?
Every time you believe to be this separate person, don't indulge in it. It's like you're boarded a train to nowhere, so jump out of it as soon as you realize you have boarded this train. See that at the very implicitly in your question there is I know you saw it. There is a separate entity. You see, you would say all questions are like that, and I say no, not all questions. If you are a question, what about consciousness? Is consciousness that way or that way? These are different questions. You know, they are not about me as a person. They are about consciousness. In other words, they are open questions because they don't make an assumption as consciousness being separate. But when you ask a question from that implicitly refers to a separate entity, it's no longer an open question because you have closed the door already. You are following me?
I'm starting from the assumption that...
Yeah. So you have made this assumption, so you have to see, because you have had glimpses that this assumption, you have no right to make it. Yeah. So then you connect that with your glimpse, and then that gives you an opportunity to drop it, to say, well, here I went again. But you will observe also that what happens is that the moments when you go into this, you fall into the trap, you will fall into it less often, and that's the period in your life when you are not identified will become longer. But when we are not identified, it doesn't feel, that's the beauty, it doesn't feel extraordinary. It feels perfectly all right. It feels very ordinary, it feels only natural. Just that you are not, there is no burden. You see? In the beginning, people have an extraordinary experience because it's like if you've been walking, carrying 45 or 50 pounds in your rucksack and hiking, for 12 hours, and you're thirsty, and all of a sudden someone comes, removes the rucksack and gives you delicious cold water. It's nirvana, instantaneous nirvana. But then you are home. You have plenty of cold water in your fridge, right? And you don't have the rucksack. It's still nirvana, right?
Thank you.
Hi, Francis. So I've been trying to, this whole thing, and really mulling over the consciousness perceiving the perception of objects. Right, so if I run an experiment, like I'm consciousness, then my all the perceptions are just right here. Right? There is no, where is the expansion? Because perception is, there's no space, physical space. Does that make sense?
No.
So consciousness perceives perceptions. Right?
Consciousness perceives perceptions.
And these perceptions of the whatever the world is or the universe is, they're all subtle objects. And then they will all appear in the same place.
Consciousness, right?
Right. I guess I'm trying to superimpose physical space because I don't see consciousness, the need to be universal, whatever that means. Because if all consciousness perceives is only perception, and these are subtle objects, then in one thing I think like I'm rejecting the world, because what is this world? It's only perception. That's the only thing that I'm perceiving. I'm not perceiving the real objects. So in some way, I'm rejecting the world, or I don't see, then there's only me, there's only I am, and everything else is just surreal. It just doesn't have any substance or meaning. Does that make sense?
What the attitude that you are, the philosophical attitude that you are describing is called solipsism. And it means only I, as a separate human body-mind, exist.
No, so some time ago you had asked, explore and see what is it that you're really sure about yourself. So the only thing that came to me was, I exist.
Yeah.
That is the only thing that I'm sure of.
And what about I perceive?
I sometimes think that I'm the perception I experience.
I experience, fine.
Okay? So that, yeah,
I am and I experience.
yes.
And can you separate these two? Being and experiencing.
I think so.
How?
See, the amness seems to be, it's there all the time. I don't feel that it is not there. The perception, the experiencing, actually, it seems to be an intellectual exercise for me. I say, okay, I'm not seeing the object, I'm seeing the perception of the object, and then I'm experiencing the perception of the object. It seems more of an intellectual exercise.
Why?
I don't know, because maybe it's because I'm not internalized it, or I'm trying to go through that process in order to internalize.
Of course, we use words to describe our experience, right?
Yeah, because I think, for all this time, due to conditioning or whatever, I've always thought that I'm actually seeing the object, right? So now I intellectually understand that I'm not seeing the object, I'm actually perceiving the perception of the object. But it's not second nature to me.
Something needs to be said is that in order to establish that you are perceiving the perception of the object and not the object, you need to agree with a peer who also agrees that that is a computer,
Right.
right? And then says, we agree it's a computer, but we don't see the same thing. In the absence of such a peer, or if you deny consciousness to this peer, then of course there are no external objects. In other words, as we talk, if you deny Francis consciousness, and if you think that you are just talking with yourself, that you are making it up as a limited mind, because you said I cannot reach the conclusion that consciousness is universal.
Yeah. What I see as, there's one consciousness, there's that body there, and there's this body here, and all these bodies that are doing what they are supposed to do by the laws of nature. They breathe, they do this, they perceive, they whatever. But there's one, that amness, that has these objects in there, but I don't need to give these objects much credence, because they are just doing what they're supposed to be doing, living by the laws of nature. And so then it just maybe helps with, the fear, or, when this body suddenly feels fear, I say, okay, this is just the, the adrenaline thing producing it, and it is not me. Because somehow these objects that we see, I have to understand that it's really not the object that I'm seeing, right? Because I'm only seeing the perception of the object.
Yes.
So how much credence do we give to that?
You seem to give it a lot of credence. The objects, the laws of nature that we...
Because, it's the laws of nature exist.
If we only knew them.
If we only knew them?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have a valid TOE. Theory of everything. It's physicist lingo.
Agreed. But I'm just looking at this human body, because when we say I'm universal consciousness, I'm going beyond the body. So then the body is just, they call it the, what is it in the Indian text? Jada, the gross. It's doing what it's supposed to do according to Prakriti, right?
Yeah, so I agree with that. So the body is doing what it is supposed to do. So what?
So that's why, what's the credence?
And the universe is doing whatever it is supposed to do, right?
Right. But then what I am perceiving is only the perception of this universe. So what am I supposed to get out of that? The fact that I'm only perceiving the perception.
So that's... What you are supposed to get from that is an uncertainty as to the universe existing solid, made of granite, out there.
So then...
To liberate you from this materialistic view, you cannot have any certainty that the universe exists solid out there, right? And that consciousness, in contradistinction with this solid granitic universe, is fragile, tied to the body. You see? So, by looking at this aspect of our experience, we remove the material quality from the universe. By removing the material quality from the universe, or putting this granitic quality in doubt, we make it possible for the universe to be consciousness-like instead of being simply granite-like. So that's what we gain through that.
Yeah, that's what I meant by giving it credence. Because if I'm only perceiving the perception, then maybe this universe is... I shouldn't make it so real. Because...
And real in the sense material, made of, this atomistic realism made of little bricks
touch and...
put together, like a building. If it is real, if it has an existence independent, then this existence is not as much like made of small components that are put together, like elementary particles or whatever. This view is very childlike, childish, you see, because it has to be conceived as an intelligent whole, which is very different, more as a, as an
Got it, yeah.
So that's what we gain. It's just part of the attempt using reason and experimentation to erode past belief systems. It's just one piece of the puzzle. The other one, it's a two-pronged approach. First, we dematerialize the universe, and on the other hand, we de-mindize consciousness.
Okay, got it.
You see, because we were identifying consciousness with mind, so consciousness was thought-like and fragile like a thought. A thought evaporates instantaneously, nothing remains. You see? So if we see consciousness as made of thought, and the world, the universe, as made of matter, and in our simplistic view, who wins? Who wins this basketball match? The heavy stuff wins. The big stuff wins. So we by understanding the reality-like quality of consciousness, its certainty, then we make it more reality-like, you see, and the matter, we dematerialize the universe.
See, if I think of it this way, right, then I have no problem understanding that the reality of the universe is my reality.
Yes. And then consciousness is that which really perceives. So we remove in this way this fallacious notion that there is an intermediary entity that does the perceiving. There is no intermediary entity. It's a vacuity. There is nobody there. You see? In this moment, it's the universe perceiving itself. Without agent, without broker, without intermediary, whatever you call it.
The other thing, you mentioned about, consciousness having a glimpse of itself. So this sense of amness, is that
Yes.
having a glimpse?
Wherever we derive this certainty of reality, this certainty that there is something rather than nothing, or this certainty there is consciousness, these are glimpses of reality. That's why we use even the word reality, which is a poor word, in fact, because it means things.
I
right?
struggled with that word for a long time. It was very difficult to quantify it. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I think the best definition is Spinoza definition of a substance. He says a substance is that which cannot not exist. And you take anything else, and you'll see that anything else, its existence is contingent, meaning it could possibly not exist. There is always a case in which it could be construed as non-existent. A computer can be construed as non-existent, a human body, a physical universe, a thought, a feeling, all of that can be construed as non-existent. It becomes more difficult for consciousness to construe it as non-existent. Because a consciousness is an experience.
Right. And right.
So, who would be there to experience the non-existence of consciousness? You see, so we see right there that consciousness already exhibits some singular qualities that take it closer to the requirement for reality, the requirement for reality being that which cannot be construed as non-existent.
I also like another one you've said before is its existence is not dependent on anything else, like the bracelet and the gold.
Yeah, yeah. But if you see these two definitions, it's easy I can leave it to you as homework, to see that they're equivalent, that one implies the other and the other implies the one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. So it seems self-evident from experience that what we are is this effortless.
Is
This by nature we're this effortless, like the the meditation the first night, I was experiencing this, what you call causalist happiness, and the phrase, the end is the beginning, or something like that, occurred to me. And it was very impersonal, and it was obvious that it wasn't caused by anything. It was just the nature of what is. It raises the question, though, of what to do, because there's obviously no. It's like that's the home ground. The end, this is what we are and what we want. But so here I am at a retreat trying to get there, but it's by nature effortless. So
what to do?
What to do? Yes.
Trust it. You see, when you come to a place like here, and you hear the words, and the words, they look like a theory, and it's a strange theory because it's a theory that cannot really be falsified, cannot be proven false. And it seems also to self-destruct, that nothing remains. You see, that which is perfect. That's the way it's supposed to be. And then you will see that by going through this theory many, many times, and this self-destruction, it leaves you with a satisfaction which is beyond words. However, on the path towards this satisfaction, we have moments when we experience something which is beyond the theory, which is more real than the theory. And that gives us confidence, which enables us to trust the theory. And the reason why we need to trust the theory is to put it in practice in our life. The more we put it in practice, the more we verify it, the more it verifies itself, the more we trust it. You see, so it's a kind of chain reaction there. If you think about it, our meetings here, they appear to be ordinary. You know, the people sitting in a room, you know, having a conversation. What is more ordinary than that? And then there are moments you see, oh, that's just the appearance. You see? There is something, we don't know what, but there is something there that you don't find in usual meetings. And something you cannot really put your finger on, you see. And there are moments, experiences, and that is also designed to increase the trust.
You know, I could see the, I guess what you call the mind coming in and, like he said, wanting to name it, hold on to it, you know, put a flag in it so I can find it later, or...
Yeah, the mistake is to try to reproduce this experience, whereas this experience was simply the theory telling you, you know what, I'm real.
The what? I
The
didn't...
theory telling you, trust me.
The other thing was dozing off then, and during the meditation, and maybe this is just...
There was what?
Dozing off, you know.
Dozing off.
Enjoying this fantastic, causeless, whatever you want to call it, and then starting to fall asleep, and then the sort of, you know, quasi-delusional thinking comes in. It's like, I don't want that. So should I fight that, or? It's not very pleasant after bliss to have these, you know, random thoughts coming in that are not always, that are just so off the wall. Maybe I just need more sleep.
You see, the goal is simple, to be free and unburdened. That's all.
Yeah, I saw that.
To be satisfied and for no reason.
Exactly, yeah. Good enough for me.
You know, the expression to be full of oneself is not bad after all.
Big yes, right?
In a good sense, you know.
You just have to not let the big S become a small s, right? Thank you.
Over the years, I've developed, I guess, a few spiritual practice I just wanted to describe and try to get a sense from you, Francis, if I'm on the right track. I read a lot of spiritual books, really enjoy them. I'm in airplanes all the time, and I have a lot of free time to read. And I feel I've derived a lot of benefit from that. I try often to each day take my stand as awareness throughout the day. It could be, say, in a client situation where I I'm with a client, and I just simply try to be very present with this person or family members, or I could be out on a walk and just trying to really just be present and experience just everything in the walk, trees and so on. And so I try to do that daily as often as possible. Try to be present when I go to sleep. And I also try to use experiences of when conflict arises in my daily life. It could be with a family member, or it could be at work, personality conflicts that happen. I try to just be really aware of what's arising inside of me, egoic responses, and just trying to be present and aware of what's happening. So I try to use conflict as a means to, I suppose, gain insight, I suppose, and just when I'm getting caught in the traps. I don't meditate regularly. I used to, but I don't do it. I've never been able to really go deep in meditation. But I have, so I would like your comment on that. And I've noticed in my life I'm definitely more peaceful more often. I used to wake up just horribly depressed for many, many years. It's not like that anymore, which is nice. So there's definitely a freedom. I notice, and even right now, my awareness is very expanded. So I'm getting sort of more feedback like that, more experiences like that, more often. I seem to be able to solve problems easier. In fact, things in the past that were problems don't really seem to be problems, but solutions tend to come a bit easier. So it seems like I'm on the right track. I've never had, like this gentleman mentioned over here, I've never had this deep mystical experience of bliss for any extended period that you read about in books. I'm not particularly concerned. It'd be kind of nice, I guess, but I'm not sitting there waiting for it every day. So I guess my question is the fact that I'm not a regular meditator, or do you have any comments around that? Would it be helpful? Should I just keep doing what I'm doing?
Yes, what you're doing is good. I would add, perhaps, whenever you're interested and feel like it, because you didn't mention that, and you mentioned you were not meditating, some exercises during the day of the expansion of the body, being aware of the expansion of the body. In other words, not to remain too much on the psychological realm, but to go also on the realm of bodily sensations. The psychological realm is often triggered by a deeper level. So it's like with people, if you connect on a deeper level, what you say with words is not important. You say, a typical example is the words, "I love you." It can mean anything or nothing, right? In other words, you can really love expresses itself without words. And the words don't necessarily express love, right? But what is more important is the feeling than the words. So the same thing is here, the feelings, in a sense, the level of bodily sensations is more important than the psychological level. For instance, if in my interaction with others, I am this expansion that includes the other, I don't need to be reminded you and I are one on the psychological level. It will whatever needs to implement itself will implement itself, and in ways that are so subtle and so spontaneous that they cannot be described. It can be the way you touch someone, or the way you smile, or the way it's so subtle and so profound. So I would, and regarding reading, that's interesting and should be continued for as long as you derived pleasure from it. There is a moment when the books become kind of obsolete. But as long as you are, the idea is follow your bliss, it makes you happy to read the book. But never read the book because you feel I have to, otherwise I'm going to hell, No, it's just because like I enjoy it, I'm interested. And some of us, and we are different in this regard, some of us, we need to follow a teaching and use the teaching as a tool to drill always on the same spot, to drill deep, We are not interested in what other teachers have said, etc. Others are also interested in reading a variety of experiences because they are trying to get to that which is invariant through all of these experiences, you see? That's interesting. There is also a drawback, is that some of these books may be not a pure expression of truth, or may have been polluted, or part of the meaning may have been lost in translation. There are all kinds of things that may happen with those spiritual books. So then it requires some kind of effort, to reconstruct the original meaning. For instance, if the translator missed something, the translation will also be in context, based on your experience of the truth, then you can re-establish the true line.
Thank you.
But what is nice about what you said is that what I like, is that you are truly making an attempt to conduct experiments in real life situations, and that's important. To trust the theory enough to put it to the test. That's very good. I think we are going to stop here. We have a full week. Thank you.